Okay, here we are for another quick one. So, Elegoo released the Saturn IV Ultra and the Mars 5 Ultra with an impressive new feature. I'll assume if you're watching this, you'll want to know what it does and how it works. Cool, I got you. Hi, I'm Ross, and this is Fohammer Videos. So, this type of test has been around for a while, but specifically only on Anycubic printers as a rather jankily implemented and poorly explained RERF test feature. I have a separate video on that, so please check it out if you want to understand the Anycubic version. But Elegoo has stepped this up to the next level by giving us direct control of the exposure times for each of the prints in the test. So this is pretty easy to use once you understand how it works, and unlike the Anycubic test, which has some specific quirks to get it to work, this has very few. In fact, it's really straightforward. So let's begin. Get whatever file you want to print. This could be a test file, it could be a specific model if it's small enough, but I'll come on to what small enough means in a sec. Take this model, put it in your slicer. Now I've been using Chitubox Basic because that's the slicer which came with my printers that wasn't Voxel Dance Tango. Now to make your test file, you need multiple copies of this test on your build plate. The way this test more intuitively worked seemed to suggest that you only need one model on the bed and the printer will put that model into the different exposure areas, but no, you need multiple copies on the plate. How many, you ask? Well, you can have either 4, 6, or 8. You need to look at the build area in your slicer and imagine some invisible grid line, 2x2 grid, a 2x3 grid, or a 2x4 grid. In the slicer, copy your model multiple times so that they all fit within one of the areas between these grid lines. If any part of the model crosses over these invisible lines, whether that's the bit touching the plate or higher up, like there's an arm sticking out over that grid line, they just will not work. Now it could be fair to say here that your slicer settings don't matter, but they do. This exposure test will only amend the normal layer exposure time for your prints, so everything else in the slicer needs to be set as you intend to use them, so things like layer height and base exposure time will not be affected when running this test. But don't worry about your normal layer exposure time because we're going to set that on the printer itself. Now, slice your file, which has your model in quadrants, sextants, or octants, and move it over to the printer. You can do this wirelessly or via the USB drive, but don't print it remotely. We need to tell the printer this will be an exposure test. So, on the printer's UI, click Tool, which should say Tools, but anyway, swipe across and choose Resin Calibration. From here, hit the squares at the bottom a few times to switch between 4, 6, or 8 tests, and this must match the number of models you put into your sliced file. Then, hit the plus button on the bottom left and import the model that you sliced in your slicer. After that, choose the exposure time for each of the models on the build plate. It should be simple to figure out which is which because the UI shows a grid and the green squares on this grid refer to each of the model's locations on the plate. Now, setting the times can be a little bit janky because sometimes you enter a new time and nothing seems to happen on the screen. There actually seems to be a few unspoken limits about how you set this. For example, the times must get lower from the top left setting to the bottom right setting. So, start by setting your maximum exposure time at the top left and then do the lowest exposure time at the bottom right. Then go for the second longest test at the top right and then the second shortest at the bottom left. So at least then you're going outwards in terms of sequence. Basically, if you try to set an exposure time lower than the one after it, the printer just won't let you. So you do need to play about with this to make sure each test is set for the time you want to expose it for. But once all these are set, just press the triangle play button. But hold up, you might actually want to check this as working first. If so, before you click play, take out the VAT and the build plate and then close the lid of the printer so you don't get the UV light shining directly in your eyes. And on the Ultras, you'll want to cover the camera lens or it'll tell you that it's detected an error and won't let you continue. But with the VAT and plate out of the way, When you start this test, the build arm will lower to the screen and you'll get a warning about a sensor not detecting enough resin or some crap. Just continue anyway. Now the first exposures will be the full length of time for your base layers, and they will all cure at the same time, and you'll have a few transition layers which are then progressively shorter. Once the printer gets to the normal layers, you should see that each of the models disappears in sequence. If not, it's probably because one of the models are crossing the invisible grid line's borders somewhere. But if this is working as you expect and they're disappearing in sequence, great. Stop the test, pop your tray and vat back in, then you can run the test properly. Once it's done, you can compare your prints to determine your favoured exposure time. I'd say best, but a lot of resin printing is really down to your personal preference. Now I'm sure you can agree, this is a great way to run the test. You can run it once with half-second differences, then again with 1/10 of a second differences, and one final time with around 100ths of a second if you want to really push it to that level. It's an incredibly fast way to dial in some good exposure times quick and crack on printing, and for 90% of the people out there, if not more, this will be more than good enough, but you can always dial it in further if you like by checking out some of the guides in more technical 3D printing channels or on Facebook and Reddit groups for your particular printer. But hopefully this has at least shown you what this test is, how you can perform it, and it'll get you printing successfully faster than on any other machine. If you like this quick content, please let me know down in the video comments, and if there are any more other tips you'd like me to cover, let me know. Thanks for watching, and a huge thanks goes to our members who are on screen now. Until next time, do you have the time to listen to me whine? Fohammer out.